Alrighty, let's go ahead. I know Damian has a lot to cover today, so um, just to reiterate, we will be recording this and send that out to everyone after this call, but we're going to go ahead and get started now. I will also be sure to send out a quick survey if you do have any feedback or things for the workforce development team in looking at additional webinars for our consultants, alumni, and our community across the US. Please keep all of your lines muted unless you do have a quick question. Feel free to also shoot me a note privately if you have any technical issues or if you'd like me to ask Damian a question on your behalf today. I'd now like to welcome our speaker, Damian. For more than 25 years, Damian has helped build better software and build software better through testing. Now, through his company, Ineffable Solutions, he helps build better people. Damian is an international keynote speaker and trainer, delivering talks and workshops that are focused on fundamental topics and people skills based on real-world experience and supplemented with deep research. His diverse experience spans many roles, industries, and companies. He's also helped organize an annual regional testing conference, or does do so yearly, and he has 10 years of theatrical improv experience, as well as authored and illustrated a children's book. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Damian to kick things off.
All right, thank you very much, Emily. Thank you for that lovely introduction. That was very nice. Thanks to TSG, the select group, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you folks for taking some time out of your day to spend here with me. I hope to make it valuable and worth your time. So let's dive in. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Emily? Thumbs up. A nod. All right, we're good to go. So this is Word Smatter, introducing, demystifying, and using semantics to better understand testers and testing. That's the subtitle. Smatter. A smatter is a slight superficial knowledge of a language or a topic or a subject or a small amount of something. And that's kind of what I'm going to give you today, just a smattering of semantics, a small amount of words. And in fact, I'm going to use words to talk about words. I'm going to get kind of meta. I'm going to use words to talk about the things that I'm talking about. So before we get started, the obligatory about me, the slide that hopefully lets you know some of my background and experience and helps build confidence and trust so that you can better listen to my message and see if the person talking to you makes sense to listen to. So my name is Damian Synadinos. If you went to the registration page, you might be noticing that the picture of the person on that page doesn't look like this person right here. But I assure you, under all this pandemic hair, I am still Damian Synadinos. Anyway, I hope the message is what counts. A little bit about me. In 1993, I dropped out of college and started testing at CompuServe, and I spent the next 25 years testing at 15 or 16 different companies around Central Ohio, big companies, little companies. As a consultant, as a full-time employee, I used lots of different approaches and methodologies and tools. So I've been around the testing game for quite some time. As Emily said, I help host the QA or the Highway Conference. We're in our 7th year here in Central Ohio. So I have a lot of diverse testing experience. As she said, I'm also an improviser. I wrote children's books. So to me, communication is very important as a tester, as a person that works with kids, as someone that writes books, as someone that does improv. Communication is very important. So I really love semantics, linguistics, and language. And that's kind of where this entire talk and topic started, is my love of semantics. So what are we going to talk about today? First, start with purpose and expectations. I think starting with the why makes sense. If you understand why you're doing something, the purpose, reason, goals, it better helps you understand what to do and how to do it. Next, I'm going to spend roughly half the time giving you a smattering of semantics, a small amount of information about semantics, things that have personally helped me better understand the topic, and hopefully it'll help you as well. And finally, the second half will be spent deconstructing a phrase and analyzing it. It's a phrase that if you're a software tester or involved in IT in any way, shape, or form, helping make or support software, you've probably heard this phrase, and we're going to deconstruct it and analyze it using some of the things we learned in the first half. So what? This is the why slide. So why are you here? This is through Zoom, so I can't really ask you folks. If you want to type in the chat why you decided to attend today, I'm very interested to know why people chose this talk. But usually I go around and I ask people, why are you here? I'm very interested in that question. So since I can't ask you directly, here's some potential reasons. Maybe you're here for a primer on semantics. Maybe you know nothing or a little bit about it. Maybe you know a lot and you want a different perspective. So I'm going to give you a primer on semantics, smattering. Words are very, very important. They create our attitudes. They drive our social policies, our perceptions. They influence our feelings. They direct our actions. They affect our lives in every single way. So even if you're not in technology, I hope that there's something you can get out of this talk today. Another reason you might be here, so what? So why am I here? To get new or practical insight into a tester's role and their responsibilities. Maybe you're a tester. Maybe you work with testers in your job or your career. And so it behooves you to understand what they do or what you do as a tester. And maybe my perspective and insight might be something new to you. But a very main reason that I would suggest you might be here is because words matter. I truly believe that. Again, that words are how we share and transfer our ideas. The things that are in my head, I want to get them into your head. And one way I do that is with words. Of course, there's other ways. We use facial expressions and body language and hand gestures. And we draw things and paint pictures. And there's all sorts of ways we communicate. But words are a very primary way that we transfer and share ideas. They help us talk pragmatically about our work, dispel myths, and lead to better practices, understand what we do. So I think that words are very important. So this is a semantics talk. Perhaps you've heard this phrase, it's just semantics. Maybe you've said that phrase. Maybe you've heard it during a debate or a discussion. So what does it mean? First thing that's notable to me is the word just. Just means only, simply, merely. It means a lot of different things, but in this context, the meaning is just simply, merely. It's only semantics. It's merely semantics. So what might somebody mean if they say this sentence? Well, perhaps they mean it's only a difference of words. If somebody says, hey, it's just semantics, maybe you and we're actually saying the exact same thing. We're in agreement. We're just using different words to agree on the same idea. Maybe that's what they mean. But sometimes if somebody says it's just semantics, maybe they mean it's merely a minor difference. So not only our words are different, but our ideas don't quite line up. They're similar, but not exactly the same. It's just semantic disagreement. But perhaps sometimes people say it's just semantics and they mean it's a fundamental difference. Not only our words are different, but our ideas are completely different. They mean drastically different things. But in my experience, most oftentimes when I hear someone say it's just semantics, here's what I think they mean. Shut up. This conversation is over. Very often I think that it's just semantics is a bullying tactic. It's used to stifle conversation. It's used to shut down ideas. It's used to stop conversation. And so that's often what I feel like someone is saying to me if they say it's just semantics in the middle of a debate or a discussion. So what does semantics mean anyway? The word semantics comes from the Greek word semantikos, and that word means significant, which I think is significant. Semantics is significant. It's important. A dictionary definition is the meaning of a word, phrase, sentence, or text. Now, that's interesting to me as somebody that loves language and semantics. It seems like I've seen this definition before. I read dictionaries all the time and I'm always looking up words, but this seemed very familiar. And I realized that I'd seen a very similar definition before. It's the definition of definition, a statement of the exact meaning of a word, almost the exact same as the definition of semantics. Well, this itself has another very similar definition, the definition of meaning, what is meant by a word, a concept, or action. So definition, semantics, meaning, all mean roughly the same thing. So if taken literally, if somebody says it's just semantics, what they might be saying literally is it's just definitions or it's just meaning. If that's the literal meaning of semantics, it's just definitions, it's just meaning, then I think that's pretty significant. If you're having a debate, a discussion, a conversation with somebody, and they say, well, we differ on definitions, or you mean this and I mean that, I would say, exactly, that seems very important. Maybe we should continue this conversation. So semantic discussions are very important. And in fact, they start when you're very, very young. Kids are always asking, what do you mean? What do you mean? Sometimes it's a simple question. If I say, you kids are just adorable. Maybe they say, well, what does adorable mean? I don't know what that word means. When they ask and you answer, that's a semantic discussion. Sometimes it's frustrating. I'll tell my kids, it's time for bed. And they say, what do you mean? Well, there's no words that they didn't understand, but they're still asking to have a semantic discussion. And sometimes it makes no sense. Sometimes they'll ask me, Daddy, when is the banana? And I don't even know. I say, what do you mean by that? So sometimes it's frustrating, but these are all semantic discussions. But it doesn't stop as a child, even as an adult. Anytime somebody says, what do you mean? They're entering a semantic discussion. Now, in my experience, I've often run into people that say, oh, I don't have time for semantics. I really don't like semantic discussions. And what I like to do is ask them, well, what do you mean? And as soon as they answer me, I've tricked them into having a semantic discussion. So semantics are terribly important, whether you think that you enjoy them or not. People are always discussing semantics. It's very, very important in order to have proper, effective transfer and sharing of ideas between two people. So for the first half, here's some of the topics I'm going to cover. A boxes metaphor that helps me better understand semantics. Going to talk about how Humpty Dumpty relates to semantics. I'll show you some disputed words. Talk about how sometimes things are the same but different. I'll give you a walk through the life of a word. I'll introduce you to some strange creatures. And finally, we'll finish up the first half with the name is not the thing. So first, boxes metaphor. I am a big believer in analogies and metaphors using, trying to explain concept A in the first context isn't working. So sometimes it helps to trade over to a different context. If somebody doesn't understand testing, maybe you can explain it in terms of cooking or skiing or something that they do understand. So I love metaphors and analogies. Another way I like to explain and transfer ideas is by using visualizations. Visualizing an idea is often very helpful for me and perhaps you as well. This is a visualization and a metaphor I came across in a book called Metaphors We Live By. And here's how it works. You imagine that each word is a box. And each word, like in a dictionary, has a definition or multiple definitions. It has meaning. So inside this box is the meaning of that word. In this case, it's the word definition. Now, earlier I gave you that definition. So let's open up this box and see what the definition is. It's a statement of the exact meaning of a word. Now, I've taken out the articles and short words of the definition just for simplicity's sake. But roughly, that's what definition means. A statement of the exact meaning of a word. But as you can see, I can express this meaning, this definition, in words, each of those being its own box. So let's open up the next box. How about we open up the box word? What does word mean? It's a single, distinct, meaningful element of speech. Okay, well, let's open up the next box. The next box is meaningful. That means having meaning. Now you can quickly see that things are starting to loop back. The word meaning has already been, it's already been a box that I've used. It's already a word. And that box contains meaning that has words that can be expressed with meaning and so on and so forth. Every single word that I say, every single word that you say is packed with meaning. And those words are packed with meaning infinitely on. So it's almost miraculous to me that anyone can communicate with anyone else, considering every time I say cow, table, desk, lamp, chair, those words mean something to me, and I hope that they mean the same thing to you. If they're sufficiently close, the meaning that you hold and I hold, then we're able to communicate. But if the meaning in your box is different than the meaning in my box, we might be miscommunicating and not even realize it. This idea was expressed beautifully in Humpty Dumpty by Lewis Carroll. In Through the Looking Glass in 1871. So Humpty Dumpty was having a conversation with Alice, and they were talking about unbirthdays. Unbirthdays are all the days of a year that are not your birthday. So Humpty says, and there's only one day for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. Well, Alice says, I don't know what you mean by glory. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously and said, of course you don't until I tell you. By glory, I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you. Alice said, but glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument. Humpty said, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, this is a very interesting passage and section of the book. And it's actually known among linguists in linguistic circles because it talks about meaning. There's what's actually happening here is there's a communication. When you communicate, it involves an unspoken, unwritten contract between the players, between the people communicating, that the words that you're using mean roughly what they're supposed to mean. In this case, Humpty used the word glory, which is a common word, but he used it in such a way that the meaning was far enough away that it confused Alice. Now, fortunately, Alice asked Humpty, what do you mean by that? And he explained. Now, she may have disagreed. In fact, she did. She says, that's not what glory means. But by asking for clarification, she understood him. Even though she didn't agree, she understood what he meant by glory, thus facilitating effective communication. Lewis Carroll went on to say in Symbolic Logic, another book, I maintain that any writer of a book is fully authorized in attaching any meaning he likes to any word he intends to use. If I find an author saying at the beginning of a book, let it be understood that by the word white, I shall always mean black, and by the word black, I shall always mean white. However injudicious I may think it be, I must accept his words. So again, even though you may disagree with someone's definition, at least you're able to communicate. This was also drawn up in XKCD, a wonderful online comic that if you're technical, you'll really love. Here's Humpty saying, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Alice says, I wonder what all those words just mean. All those words you said mean. Maybe it means you're telling me I can have all your stuff. And he says, what? No. And she says, oh, your car too? Gosh, thanks. So it kind of shows if you go and break that unspoken, unwritten contract and attach meaning to a word that's too far away, miscommunication can occur. Now, Alice disputed his meaning of the word glory. She said, that's not what glory means. And this happens in real life. Let's talk about some disputed words. Sometimes people will say a word and you'll overhear, or maybe even you'll do yourself, you'll dispute the meaning of that word, saying, that's not what that means. Well, let's dig into some of these. Fewer and less. These are words that sometimes people will dispute. Now, they roughly mean the same thing. In fact, many of you may think that they're just synonyms, and they're very close. But there is a distinct difference. Fewer is for things that you can practically count, while less is usually used for things that you cannot practically count. For example, fewer people have less patience for discussing semantics. You can count how many people, but you can't really count patience. It's an abstract construct. So sometimes people will dispute the meaning of fewer or less. Some people might be at a grocery store and say, that sign shouldn't say 10 items or less, because you can count the items in a shopping cart. It should say 10 items or fewer. But the key is, do people understand what the sign means, or are they completely lost? Is the meaning of less or fewer so far from the unspoken, unwritten contract of what that word is supposed to mean that people won't understand? Here's another set of disputed words. Expect and anticipate. Again, oftentimes they're seen as synonyms, but there's a distinction. Expect is something that's regarded as likely to happen, while anticipate is the same, except you also will take action. For example, she anticipated a difficult test, and so she studied hard. Compare that to she expected a high grade because she studied hard. So you can see there's a subtle difference. But again, if you use anticipate when you should have used expect, or expect when you should have used anticipate, will people still understand what you mean? Probably. What about literally and ironically? These are two words that have dictionary definitions and meanings that if people use them commonly that are so far from those actual dictionary definitions, they've effectively changed meaning. Literally actually has recently had a new definition added to many dictionaries that talks about how it can be used to express strong feelings in a figurative way. Believe it or not, literally actually means figuratively now, per some dictionaries. Ironically, famously, Alanis Morissette kind of ruined this word. Ironically, oftentimes just means something that's surprising, but not necessarily ironic. Now, if you look up disputed words, there's wonderful lists of them. I think one of them is on Wikipedia, and it's fascinating to see how many words you often thought mean basically the same thing, but there's actual subtle nuanced differences. Another one is done, finished, or complete. Maybe in your workplace, you have a definition of done, a definition of finished, a definition of complete, and they all mean different things. Or maybe in your workplace, those words all mean the same thing. You could say, I finished my work, or I completed my work. They mean the same thing. What's interesting, I was at a company one time as a new employee, and during the onboarding process, they gave me a document which included a glossary of company-specific lingo, acronyms, terms, jargon. And it was very useful for somebody joining the company because it allowed me to better speak their language. Well, I came across the definition of done. They had actually a formal definition of done within the IT department. Here's what done means. Not very interesting in and of itself, but after that, they had a definition for the word or term done, 2 dones in a row, and it meant something different than the word done. Then they had a third term they called done, and I thought, this is crazy. It means something different than done, and something different than done, and I thought, this is kind of silly. But after retrospection, I thought about it and I realized that this is brilliant because now they can more effectively communicate with one another. Somebody can say to someone else, hey, is your work done? And they'll say, well, it's done, but not done. And those two people, if they understand that language and those words and their meaning, will have complete understanding and agreement about what they're talking about. Finally, best practice. This is a term that in my experience is often disputed. People will sometimes shy away from using the word or term best practice, but I wanted to dig into it because it's so frequently disputed in my experience. This is my daughter, Alina. This is one of our daddy-daughter dates. We were out driving around and having a grand old time. And while we're in the car, she says to me this. She says, Daddy, Stella is my best friend and Avery is my best friend. Well, I laughed and told her she's an idiot because you can only have one best friend. No, that didn't happen. What I did say was, sweetheart, what do you mean? How can Stella be your best friend and Avery also be your best friend? And she said, well, Daddy, I mean, Stella's my really good friend and Avery's my really good friend. I went, oh, okay. So just like Alice did with Humpty Dumpty, I disputed the meaning of her word and I asked for clarification. Now, I kind of disagree. Best doesn't really mean really good. It means one of a kind. It can only have one best. But by her explaining what she meant, I was able to understand what she meant. So let's dig into this a little more. What does best mean? That which is the most excellent, outstanding, or desirable. Let's look at the next word in the term, practice. It's the actual application or use of an idea, a belief, or a method. A definition of best practice in the dictionary, you put those two words together, is a procedure that is accepted or prescribed as being correct or most effective. Now, one note, I don't see anywhere in this definition where it says always or without fail. It doesn't say a procedure that is always forevermore accepted or prescribed, but a lot of times when people hear best practice, that's what they hear. They hear somebody saying always without any context. Let's dig a little deeper. Best practice can actually mean different things. Think about the word best. Best could be taken subjectively, like a bowl of soup. Somebody says, hey, did you try at that new restaurant? I said, yeah, they have the best soup. Well, it's clearly I'm not speaking for all of humanity. It's just my personal subjective opinion, but I'm using the word best, and that's clearly communicated to that person that I think this is a great, really good soup. How about this? Hey, you won the race. You were the best today. I don't think that they're the best human in the entire world. What I mean is in some particular set of circumstances, in some context, meaning you were the best out of these runners in this race at this time, in this city, on this day, you were the best. Now you remove any of those other constraints and I might not be able to say that you're the best. Or sometimes it's used figuratively or as hyperbole, the world's best boss. I haven't had every boss in the world, but I still might buy my boss this because it evokes emotions. It lets them know how I feel about them. So when people say best practice, are they really saying it is the best, absolutely without question practice anywhere in the world? Or are they saying, I really think this is a good practice? Or are they saying it's the best practice, trying to evoke emotions? Or perhaps they're saying, this is the best practice for our team in this company, in this team, on this day with these circumstances. If that's the case, then I'm okay with them calling that a best practice, with the understanding there's always room for improvement. And if any of those circumstances change, it may no longer be best. Let's talk about same but different. There's a better term for this. It's called distinction without a difference. The distinction without a difference is an artificially created distinction where no real or meaningful distinction exists. So what does same but different mean? I'm going to try to give you an example through a 80s pop culture movie, Crocodile Dundee. Now in this movie, there's a very famous scene where Crocodile Dundee on the right there with a hat is walking down the street with a friend and they're mugged. They're approached by a mugger who says, give me all your money, and he pulls out a knife. Well, in this scene, Crocodile Dundee kind of chuckles. He looks at the knife and he pulls out a much bigger knife and says to the mugger, that's not a knife, that's a knife. And the mugger gets scared and he runs away. Now, what exactly happened in this scene? What was going on? It might be that the writers of the movie, the director, were trying to show that the hero of the movie, Crocodile Dundee, was a blithering idiot, or maybe he was blind and couldn't see very far. But that's not what they were saying. He clearly knew what a knife was. So why did he say that that's not a knife and this is a knife? What was going on? They're the same thing, but he was making a distinction. If there is no real distinction, then what is the purpose of the distinction? This is one example from a movie, but there's plenty of examples. Imagine a cop pulls you over and says, have you been drinking alcohol? And you say, no alcohol, just beer. That's the same but different. The cop says, please step out of the car. And you say, that's not a car, that's a Ferrari. Well, they're the same but different. The cop says, sir, I think you've been lying to me. And you say, I'm not lying, I'm just using alternative facts. That's a term that's pretty recent. So what's going on here? What about if somebody says that's not a defect, it's a feature? If there's no real distinction between the two things, between a car and a Ferrari, between alcohol and beer, between two knives, then what's really going on? If you recognize a distinction without a difference, if something's same but different, maybe dig a little deeper and find out why they're making that distinction. In this case, with Crocodile Dundee, I think the writers were trying to show that Crocodile Dundee was trying to raise his status while simultaneously lowering the status of the mugger. In other words, trying to intimidate him through words. Sometimes a distinction without a difference can be used to create a social or political commentary, or maybe advance an agenda. If you dig down into why somebody is saying something, you'll often find the underlying reason. You'll understand why they're saying it. Let's talk briefly about the life of a word. Words are born, they live, they die, just like many other things. And when a word is first born, it's called a neologism. This comes from the Greek words neo, which means new, and logos, which means word. It's a newly coined word or expression. So it's entering common use. Maybe it's not widespread yet, but it's slowly gaining acceptance and people are starting to attach this word and this meaning together. So I'll give you some examples of words that are constantly being born, living, changing, and dying. Unbirthday, I talked about those. Lewis Carroll introduced us to those words in the 1800s. It's all those days of a year that are not your birthday. Noob, this is from the 2000s. It's somebody that's new to the internet. Truthiness, this comes from Stephen Colbert. It's coined it again in the mid-2000s, saying that something that has a truth feel, but it's not necessarily true. Sometimes existing words are repurposed and they have an alternate or changed meaning. Google used to just be a very large number, but now you understand it as a company, or if it's even a verb to Google something, to search for something on the internet. Spam used to be a meat, now it's a meat and also an unwanted email or correspondence through the internet. Cloud, things in the sky, but also someone else's computer. These are words that have existed and gained new meaning. Sometimes not only the meaning changes, it becomes the exact opposite of what it used to be. The word bully used to mean somebody that's a great, wonderful person. Now it's somebody that intimidates you. Awesome used to mean awful, something to inspire terror or dread. Now it means something that's awe-inspiring. Where in contrast, awful used to be something that's awe-inspiring, and now it means something that's bad or unpleasant. So sometimes the meaning changes drastically to be the 180-degree polar opposite. Sometimes new words are created by smashing up two words, a portmanteau or a mashup. Brunch is a combination of breakfast and lunch. Spork is a spoon and fork put together, a new word created, spork. Dun, 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 that's the example I gave earlier. Those are brand new terms that are created and have distinct meaning attached to them. And sometimes words die. Fudgel is an old word that nobody uses anymore. It's pretending to work, but not really doing anything. Brabble is arguing about nothing. Apricity is the warmness of a summer sun in winter. So these are words that had wonderful meaning, were used widely, but now no longer exist. So words are born, they live, they change, they die, which is another reason that when somebody disputes a word, you have to remember that words are evolving, they're living things. And that just because awesome used to mean something else, or resource, or literally, or ironic, or best practice used to mean something, it might mean something else. And it behooves you to find out, what does that person mean? Now I'll quickly introduce you to a couple strange creatures. The first is called a tardigrade. There's other names for it. It's also known as a water bear or a moss piglet. The second creature I'd like to introduce you to, it's a species of very large saltwater clam. It's a mollusk. It's native to the west coast of North America. Its shell ranges from 15 to 20 centimeters. It has a very long neck or a siphon. It actually spits water out of the siphon when it's under the sand. It burrows deep. It shoots spouts of water. It's often bred and eaten as a delicacy. There's some pictures of it you can see at the bottom there. So now I've introduced you to two creatures, very strange creatures, but I would ask you, and I usually ask the audience, which one do you feel that you know more about? And unfailingly, people will always say the second, the latter creature. They know more about it. I said, well, why is that? You don't even know what it's called. I haven't given you the name of this creature. How can you possibly claim to know much more about it? And they say, well, I know many details, many attributes and characteristics and information. I have knowledge about this thing, even though I don't have the name. And in contrast with the first one, you have three different names, but you might not know anything about that creature. This section was inspired by Richard Feynman, American theoretical physicist. He has a short talk called The Difference Between Knowing the Name of Something and Knowing Something, and why knowing the name of something is an important thing, but it's not always the most important. Knowing about something is often far more important. This happened to me in my real life. I was consulting at a company, and I was in charge of a group of testers, and we got a new build, and I asked one of the testers to go run a regression test. I said, we got the new build, please go do regression testing. And they said, sure, and they left, and they came back in a very short amount of time, later that same day, and said, I finished the regression testing, looks great. I went, wow, that was fast. What was odd was several days later, bugs that were reported should have been caught during regression testing, so I was left scratching my head. The next week, we got a new build, and again, I asked the same tester to go do regression testing, and the same story played out again. They left, came back very short, said everything looks good, but bugs were exposed that should have been caught during regression testing. Now, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. I was fooled almost 3 times. The third week, when we got the third build, I was about to ask this tester to go do regression testing, but before I did, I said, stop. What is regression testing? What does that term mean to you? And they said, well, regression testing, you know, we have thousands of tests that we always run against the builds. I said, yeah. They said, well, I only pick select few of those, a few of the important functionality just to make sure that the build works. That's regression testing. I said, oh my gosh, what you've just described to me, I know as the term smoke testing or sanity testing, perhaps. Regression testing to me means running all of the tests that we typically run against a build. And so I was unaware, but we were miscommunicating, but not realizing it. George Bernard Shaw has a famous quote, the biggest enemy of communication is the illusion that it has taken place. In fact, the first 2 weeks that I thought I was communicating with this tester saying, go regression test, I thought we were communicating, but in fact we weren't. We didn't recognize it. It's because we had different words attached with different meaning. So that's an example how sometimes knowing the name of something, if you don't have the shared meaning, if our boxes of meaning aren't shared, then we are miscommunicating. So before I move on, I won't leave you hanging. What is a tardigrade? Some of you may know, but for those that don't, it's a water-dwelling, 8-legged, segmented microanimal. It's actually visible to the naked eye. It's very resilient. It can survive different temperatures and environments at extremophile. There's some pictures. It's a fascinating creature. And the second one, well, there's the name of it. I'll give you a second to read it aloud. I'm guessing many of you read it as geoduck, but in fact, the way you pronounce that word is geoduck, geoduck. That comes from a Lushosit language of the Nisqually American tribe. And although it's not spelled like it sounds, that's how you say it. So this is another kind of interesting thing about semantics is sometimes words are not pronounced like they sound, like kernel or February or GIF. Finally, the name is not the thing. Maybe you're familiar with the passage from Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Well, is that true? Is it true that a rose called by any other name would smell as sweet? What if instead of a rose, they were known as stink blossom? What if people referred to these as stink blossom? How would you feel about giving your significant other a bouquet of stink blossoms? Or even worse, what if they were called phlegm flowers? That sounds pretty disgusting to me. Now, would that actually change the rose? No, it doesn't change the chemical, physical attributes of the rose. But would it smell as sweet? Remember, words change our perception and our emotional reaction to things. So although a rose may literally and technically smell as sweet, perhaps my reaction to it and my perception of it is lessened because the words that we use. The name is not the thing is also referred to as the map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. The model is not the thing that's being modeled. In testing or technology, the test plan is not the plan for testing. Sometimes people will confuse the name or a model or a representation of a thing for the actual thing itself. Now, while you shouldn't confuse them, you should remember that one thing can influence someone's perception about the actual thing. So summary, boxes metaphors, it's a way that I helped visualize and better understand the complexity of language and meaning. Humpty Dumpty, how sometimes people can use words in uncommon ways, thus breaking that contract. I encourage you to try and be aware of that and then challenge it when it happens so you can at least understand even if you don't agree. Disputed words. Of course you can dispute words, but is effective communication still happening? If you're disputing something that are essentially the same, expect and anticipate, or car and Ferrari, what is the reason? What? They're the same thing, but they're different. So there must be a reason for that distinction. The life of a word. Words are living things. So remember that if someone's disputing the meaning, maybe it's just a meaning that's grown or evolved. Strange creatures, the name of the thing is important, but less important than the knowing of the thing. And finally, the name is not the thing. While it can affect your perception of it, it doesn't affect the actual qualities of it. So that's roughly half of it. Next, we're going to jump into phrase deconstruction and analysis. This is going to use some of the things we talked about in the first half to deconstruct this phrase. Testers do or don't help prevent or detect problems. It's written like this because I've seen many, many variations of this phrase in my life. I've heard it said by many people at many companies. Testers don't help prevent problems. Testers do detect problems. Testers don't help prevent or detect bugs. I've heard all sorts of different phrases. So I want to dissect this and figure out what exactly does this mean. But I'm going to do it in reverse. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way backwards. So let's start with the word problems. A definition is a matter or situation regarded as unwelcome or harmful, needing to be dealt with and overcome. I'm going to check to see if there's any. All right, nobody's asked any questions yet. Great. If you have any questions, type them into the chat. Emily will let me know, or we can tackle them at the end. I'm trying to go fast here. Problem is a matter or situation regarded as unwelcome, harmful. Another definition by late great Jerry Weinberg, a difference between things as desired and things as perceived. I really like that because it points out the difference between something, an emotional response, something that you desire, and something as how you perceive it. In technology, we often refer to problems as this word, bug, an error in a computer system, a computer program or system. Brett Petticord has a wonderfully pithy definition, anything that bugs someone. It's wonderful, to the point. But bugs and problems are known by other terms as well. Defects, issues, failures, glitches, errors, exceptions, mistakes, incidents, goofs, slip-ups. There's lots and lots of terms that we use to talk about problems. Now, why is that important? Why is it important if you call a problem by the word issue, or an issue, you call it a glitch or an error? Well, a couple different reasons. The first is, remember how words can affect your perception or your emotions towards a topic or the idea? Imagine going to a developer and saying, hey, I was testing your code, I was testing your feature or function, and I found a glitch. Can I show it to you? The developer might say, sure, let me see. Compare that to going to that same developer and saying, hey, I was testing your feature, your function, and I found a goof, a blunder. How might that person react? I mean, technically, you're talking about the same thing. It was a problem, but you used a different word. Maybe they're less receptive to you now. So words have emotional attachments to them. So what you call a problem is important. Secondly, sometimes there's legal reasons. What if you are a company and you have a contract with another company? You're making software for another company, and in the contract it says the software should be delivered with no more than 5 bugs, 5 defects perhaps. And you deliver the software and it's pretty bad. And that client comes back and says, hey, according to the contract here, you were only supposed to have 5 or fewer defects. But we've counted at least 20 different things that are wrong with this. And you say, well, we delivered with 5 defects. The rest of those are glitches. So maybe there's legal ramifications. You have to have very, very firm formal definitions for what you call problems, especially when there's legal ramifications. Another idea that's related to problems is the idea of relativism. This is pretty heady, but relativism is the doctrine that knowledge and truth and morality, they only exist in relation to some culture or society or historical context. They're not absolute, they're subjective. Now, the relative rule was coined by Michael Bolton, and he says, for any abstract X, X is X to some person at some time. Now, I really like this. This came from Jerry Weinberg's definition of quality. Quality is value to some person. I like this rule, but I've rephrased it a bit. I've rephrased the relative rule as something that describes the relationship between someone, that's who, and something, that's what, at some time, that's when. So what is the relative? It describes exactly that, someone at some time and the relationship between someone and something at some time. Now I'll give you an example to try and help make this more clear. Again, visual learning. This is a teddy bear. Of course, you've all seen teddy bears, but it's not just any teddy bear. This is baby Sarah's teddy bear. And you know what? Baby Sarah really loves that bear. She adores that bear. In fact, it's not just a bear to her, it's Mr. Snuggles. So that kind of shows what her relationship is to this particular teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles. This is Sarah's friend Jane, baby Jane. Now, baby Jane knows about the bear, but she's somewhat indifferent to it. It's not her, Mr. Snuggles, it's just a bear. So you change the who, and all of a sudden the relationship to the thing changes. This is a blanket, but it's not just any blanket. This is baby Jane's blanket. So clearly she loves that blanket. Now baby Sarah is aware of it, but she's indifferent to it. This is an example of changing the what. You change the thing from a bear to a blanket, and that changes the relation to it. Finally, this is baby Jane all grown up. She's a woman now. Now she's aware of the bear and the blanket, but now as an adult, she's rather indifferent to both of them. So this is an example of changing the when. So if you change the who or the what or the when, the relationship can change. Now, to bring it back into terms that we're more accustomed to, what if instead of a blanket, that was a bug, a problem, an error, a glitch? Maybe when you're ordering something online, you fill up your shopping cart, you click purchase, and instead of purchasing that product, it throws a bug. Well, guess what? Baby Sarah doesn't really care about that. She's indifferent. Baby Jane, she doesn't care either. She's not purchasing things online, but adult Jane, she's pretty angry. So again, talking about the relationship between someone at some time and something. The thing may be a quality attribute or a bug or a problem. So what? The words, what we call problems, might matter because they elicit emotional responses. And also remember that problems are relative. They're subjective. You change the relationship based on who you are, what you are, and when you are. Let's move on to preventing and detecting. Prevent means keeping something from happening or arising. In contrast, detecting is discovering or identifying the presence of something or the existence of something. Now, when I do this presentation, I always look up through Google recent news articles that have the word prevent or detect in the title. And here's some that had the word detect. China launches a coronavirus app to detect whether users have come in close contact with the sick. New video tech will help Minnesota police detect suspects. Can AI detect fake news? We remember how words affect our emotions. Here's how I felt after reading these headlines. Okay, so they detected these things. That's okay, I guess. In fact, if you read these stories, this is my emotions don't really change. In the one about Minnesota police detecting suspects, it says Chief Higgins said he believed that the technology would help solve cases going forward. It won't prevent them, so this technology won't help me from being mugged. It'll just find out who mugged me after the fact. Okay, I guess. So the word detect kind of evokes a certain thing even before I know the details of the article. Let's compare that to the word prevent. Installation of technology to prevent rail crashes nears completion. San Antonio firefighters prevent fire from spreading to University Hospital. What steps can you take to prevent identity theft? Now, even just from the headline alone, reading these makes me feel a little bit happier. Hey, great. They have technology that will prevent rail crashes. It's not that a train crashes and they have some satellite that can say, we found another crash. They're actually having technology that can prevent these things from happening. So just the words alone can make me feel a little bit differently. That's taken from the previous section. Still talking about preventing and detecting, let's talk about causality. It's basically the relationship between cause and effect. So let's go back. I'll show you an example to try and clear up how causality might relate to preventing and detecting problems. I'll give you a story. There's the bug I talked about when you try and purchase something through a website. Instead of buying that thing, it crashes. And we already know how that makes adult Jane feel. It makes her feel very angry. But just like cause and effect, it's never a one-to-one relationship. There's always many causes that have many effects, whether they're known or not. That's the way it works. So in this very simplistic example, this bug not only makes adult Jane angry, but it also makes the company lose money. Nobody's buying their products because their program is crashing. So two effects. But what caused this bug? What caused this error dialog to pop up? Well, if you go back in time, it turns out there was an error in the code, an extra semicolon. It was just an extra semicolon. It compiled fine, but at runtime, it actually caused this dialog to pop up when somebody clicks purchase, and that makes adult Jane angry and makes the company lose money. Well, where did that extra semicolon come from? Well, there's developer Joe, and he's usually a fantastic developer, one of our top guys, but today he was really tired. You can see him yawning there. And unfortunately, he was so tired, he hit an extra semicolon. It compiled, he checked in his code to the branch, and it caused this bug in production and made Jane angry and made the company lose money. Well, why is Joe tired? Because he was up all night. He couldn't sleep because this darn barking dog next door. The dog was barking and barking, which caused Joe to be tired, more tired than normal. And he typed an extra semicolon and so on and so forth. And why was the dog barking? Well, first it was cold outside and the dog wasn't inside. It was outside and didn't have a doghouse. So this poor dog was outside all night in the cold. It was barking, keeping Joe awake. Joe was so tired the next day, he hit an extra semicolon, checked in the code, which caused a production runtime bug and made adult Jane angry and the company lost money. So let's talk about preventing and detecting. Depends on where you put your point of view in this causality chain. Let's put a point of view right there. If you as a tester were testing in the staging environment and you discovered this bug before it went to production, might it be fair to say that you detected that problem? Sure. But is it also fair to say, therefore, you prevented Jane from being angry and you prevented the company from losing money? Maybe that's a reasonable statement. Let's change our point of view. What if you are attending a code review and you look down and you say, hey, line 45 has an extra semicolon. Is that supposed to be there? Somebody says, oh my gosh, it's not. You're right. Is it fair to say that you detected that? Sure. Then if you detected that and someone takes action and they remove that semicolon, is it fair to say you prevented that dialogue, that error dialogue from ever popping up, thus preventing Jane from being angry and preventing the company from losing money? Maybe those are reasonable statements. What about this? You're the other neighbor to the dog and you heard it barking all night. You detected it. What if you go over and ask the neighbor, bring your dog inside? And they bring it in and the dog stops barking. Is it also possibly reasonable to play this out and say, well, then you prevented Joe from being tired and hitting an extra semicolon and checking in the code and causing the dialogue and making Jane angry and the company loses money? Perhaps those are all reasonable statements. There's no way of knowing if those would have happened. But to say that someone detected one type of problem, thus preventing other forms or types of problems, is sometimes reasonable to say. Now, if you're wondering what the heck was Jane trying to buy on the internet when she clicked purchase, that's right. She was trying to buy a doghouse for her poor cold dog. So in some kind of weird time causality loop, she caused her own bug. I like that. Okay, so what? Potential effects of word choice. The word that you use actually might make a difference to how you feel about it. Preventing or detecting things in news headlines makes you feel differently. Also consider causality in the perspective. Depending on where you put your frame of reference, it might be fair to say by detecting one thing, you prevented another problem, whether it's the same problem or in a different form or a different problem. It might be fair to say you've also prevented those. All right, help. Help is a concatenative verb. It's a chain verb. It's followed by another verb, and it helps give extra information. It makes the definition of help makes it easier for someone to do something, improve a situation, be of benefit or assistance to. So let's look at how the word help is important in this sentence. There's our little example again. Our point of reference is right here. Let's say you're a tester and you are testing away in the staging environment, and you come across this, you click purchase, and up comes that error dialog. Is it fair to say that you've detected that by yourself? Yeah, I think it's fair to say that you detected that bug all by yourself. No one was holding your hands. You weren't doing pair programming or mob programming. You were just sitting at your desk testing. Now, technically, somebody else had to make the program. Very likely somebody else wrote the code that made the program. So you couldn't have done it without the program existing. Technically, somebody made the computer you're on. You didn't make the computer. Somebody had to mine the sand and the silicon and all that. So technically, you needed help to do this. But in a limited context, you discovered this all by yourself. You detected this problem. You didn't need any help at all. So it's probably reasonable to say that you detected it. Therefore, is it also reasonable to say that you prevented Jane from getting angry and the company from losing money all by yourself? Perhaps. Let's change our point of view now. Now you're sitting in the code review and you notice that there's an extra semicolon, and you raise your hand, you say, hey, I noticed an extra semicolon. I don't think that's right. Is it fair to say you detected that all by yourself? Sure. Now, if somebody takes action and says, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to check out the code, I'm going to remove that semicolon, I'm going to check it back into the branch, we'll push back out to production. Now, I'm not doing that, so maybe I actually need their help to prevent the bug from showing up and Jane from being angry. So I actually helped prevent. I didn't prevent it by myself, but I helped prevent it. So the help is very important, whether you can do something on your own or whether you require the assistance of others. What about the dog? Can I muzzle it by myself, or do I need to ask the owners? Depending on what problem you're dealing with, tells whether you can do it by yourself or not. The inclusion or exclusion of the word help might change the entire meaning of the phrase. And consider the specific problem. Is it a barking dog, an extra semicolon, or an actual error dialog? And if detection or prevention of that problem can be done all by yourself alone, or if it requires assistance. I can't do anything about this myself. I need Joe, the developer, to actually check out the code, make the change, and put it back in to say that I've helped prevent something. Moving on, helping verbs. These are verbs that can help the main verb in a sentence by extending its meaning. It conveys complicated shades of meaning. There's different types of helping verb. One is auxiliary verbs. These are verbs used in formatting the tenses or moods, the voice of other verbs. Here's a couple of them: do or don't. These are present tense, did and didn't, or past tense. So oftentimes you'll see testers do help, or don't, or didn't, or did help prevent or detect problems. But there's a certain type of auxiliary verb. They're called modal verbs. They express necessity or possibility. Here's a list of them. Can or could, they talk about ability or possibility. You can do this, or you could do it. May or might talk about permission. You may do that. You might do that. It's possibility. Will or would are regarding request or consequences. Must is something that is a necessity or a requirement. Testers must prevent defects, or testers must detect problems. Now, the last one's very interesting. Shall or should. This is about obligation, correctness, or suggestion. Now, those are subjective ideas, and we'll get to that in just a second. But depending on which modal verb you stick in the sentence can drastically change the meaning of it. Here's a few examples. Testers do help prevent or detect problems. They do. I'm telling you that as a fact. Or testers didn't help prevent or detect problems. I was there. They didn't at all. Testers can. They have the possibility. Testers may. They have permission to detect problems. Testers will or must. It's a necessity at this company. And how about that last one? Testers should help prevent or detect problems. This might be a conversation you're having with somebody trying to figure out what's right, what's correct. That leads to the next part. Descriptive statements. These are statements that make an assertion based on empirical evidence. These are called facts. Now compare those against normative statements, something that expresses a value judgment, opinions, the word should. For example, descriptive is an 11-letter word. Normative is a better word. One states a fact, one states an opinion. That's important, especially when you're dealing with that modal verb, should. So what? Identify the helping verb that's used or omitted or perhaps even implied, and that will help you better understand what might actually be meant by the statement. And consider if the statement is a fact or opinion. Is it a descriptive or a normative statement? Are they telling you something that has actually happened or is fact-based, or are they telling you something that they believe is correct and right? Finally, testers. Before I get into what a tester is, I'm going to talk about testing. Lots and lots and lots of different definitions for testing. A couple that I particularly like. The first comes from rapid software testing, Bach and Bolton's approach to testing, the process of evaluating a product by learning about it through exploration and experimentation, which includes to some degree questioning, studying, modeling, observing, inferring, all sorts of things. I like this a lot because it gives a lot of meat to exactly what you do to test: experiment, question, study, model. Another definition of testing I like comes from Kem Kainer. He says that it's an investigation conducted, why? To provide stakeholders with information about the quality of the product or service under test. So this definition, Kem Kainer's definition, actually includes a reason, a why. Now, I used to mash up these two definitions, but in recent times, I've come up with my own definition of testing. So here's how I define testing. It's a mouthful. Strap yourselves in. Utilizing various tools and approaches. When I'm testing, I am using various tools, different technologies and approaches, different ways of doing things in some combination and to some degree. Sometimes I use a lot of tools and just one approach. Sometimes I use a combination of approaches and just a few tools or no tools. In some combination and to some degree, I use a little bit of this tool and I borrow parts of this approach. Why? To help evaluate quality. That's testing. You're evaluating, assessing quality, value to someone at some time. How? Via exploration and experimentation, two huge words implying that sometimes you're like an explorer where you're going out and you don't know really what you'll find. It's uncharted territory. So you're pushing and prodding and poking and you're discovering new things that you didn't know before. And you're experimenting like a scientist. Sometimes you have a hypothesis that's based on a requirement or a user expectation. And you say, does the product actually compare? How does the product compare against this requirement or expectation or hypothesis? Often to obtain pertinent, useful information. So if I do all this testing and I evaluate quality and get a lot of information, what do I do with it? I'm obtaining all this information, but what kind of information? It must be pertinent and useful. And what do I do with it? I provide it to relevant stakeholders. If I hoard it to myself, that's not doing much good. So I give it to people, but not just any people, people that are interested in it, relevant stakeholders. Why? To enable them to make more informed, confident decisions. Sometimes people will say that testing does not improve confidence. And I would say that's unqualified. Confidence in what? Confidence in the product, I might agree. But testing does directly improve confidence in my decisions because testing provides information, and with information, you can make better, more informed, educated decisions. So it's enabling more informed, confident decisions. Why? It may also indirectly lead to increased quality. If I provide a lot of testing information and nobody does anything with it, well, then maybe it doesn't lead to any increased quality at all. So this is my definition of testing. And that is important to know because what is a tester? It's one who performs testing. So anybody that is doing all of these things, at that moment in time, they are acting as a tester. And remember, we're looking at the phrase, testers do or don't help prevent or detect problems. So why is this important? As testers, we do a lot of different things. We're constantly getting pulled in different directions. Now, maybe you're sitting at your desk and you're poking and prodding and experimenting and exploring an application, and somebody says, hey, what are you doing? And you can say, I'm detecting problems. I'm looking for them at this moment because that's the definition of testing. So I'm detecting problems. And then maybe you're sitting in a code review and you notice an out of place, an extra semicolon. You've detected a problem. That's part of exploring and evaluating quality. You're evaluating the quality of written code. Now, if somebody says, Damian, you have the permission at this company. You have the skills. You know the computer language. You have the setup, the environment. You go check out that code, remove that semicolon, check the code back in. I say, great. When I'm doing those things, I'm no longer acting as a tester because that's not part of testing. But what if my company changed the definition of testing? What if at my company it said utilizing various tools and approaches in some combination to some degree, blah, 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 and checking out code, editing code, and checking in code? What if that was a definition of testing at my company? Then when I was doing those things, not only I detected the problem earlier, but since I'm actually preventing the problem from occurring, it might be fair to say, as a tester, I am testing when I'm doing those things. So what? The definition of testing, how you define testing at your company, might change the meaning of the phrase. And consider the actions performed to better understand the accuracy of the phrase. What are you doing at this moment in time? Is it fair to say that you are testing? If so, are you preventing or detecting a problem? So testers detect defects. They don't prevent problems. Testers must help detect bugs, or they should help prevent bugs. Testers can prevent failures, and testers can't help prevent issues. Are these true or false, right or wrong? Exactly. You have to understand what is meant by each one of these. So, in summary, testers understand the definition of testing. What does testing mean in your context? That'll help you better understand the role and the responsibility of tester and the meaning of the phrase that somebody's saying to you. Do or don't, those are those helping verbs. Understand which helping verb is used or omitted, and if it's a statement of fact or opinion. Help. That little tiny word, if it's included or excluded, can change the meaning of the phrase. See how it affects the meaning of the phrase. Prevent or detect. Consider the word choice can affect someone's emotional response, and also consider the causality, your point of view. What problem specifically are you talking about? And finally, problems by any other name are subjective. What's a problem to you may be a feature to me. Final summary, I recently came across this tweet by a friend of mine, Keith Klain, and I think it summarizes the entire point of this presentation. Keith says, what if we spent more time talking to each other about what words actually mean instead of being wound up about what we think people meant by them? I completely agree with that sentiment. Remember, words matter. Words are significant. Semantics are important. They help us communicate each other and, more importantly, understand each other. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. My name's Damian, and I'm ready for your questions.
I have a quick question, Damian. I'm just curious how, when you started out your career on the testing side, like when did you realize how passionate you were about words and how much they matter?
Two different questions there. I kind of, as many testers did, fell backwards into testing. My friend of the family got me a job interview at CompuServe in 1993. I was 19 years old with no degree. And I started testing in their department. They hired me full time, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I've been trained on the job, in the workspace through specific training and on the job training or being sent out, and just kind of learning as I go. As far as words and semantics, it actually traces back to a life experience. I got divorced about 15 years ago, and it was painful. And it turns out the direct cause of that was miscommunication. It wasn't about dirty dishes and laundry. It was that we weren't communicating well. So the last 15 years, I've set about learning how to become a better communicator to avoid life disasters and pain. And from that, I realized that being a better communicator not only helps me avoid divorce, but it helped make me a better tester. And it's really important in every aspect of our lives. So I'm not an expert, whatever that is. I'm just somebody that has learned a lot. I think I'm a better communicator, and I'm sharing some of the things that I've learned with others in hopes that it'll help them as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Hi, I have a comment. This is Ursula, and I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, Ursula.
I think yes, communication is so key for every role. But I had an experience where I was new to the team. Mm-hmm. And the team lead would say things while we were meeting that I didn't understand. And I asked a question once. She told me to go, she said, oh, one of your team members knows exactly what the process is. Kind of like what you were talking about, go do regression testing. Mm-hmm. So after the meeting, I went and asked that team member, what do we need to do to accomplish this task? She's like, I don't know. I said, okay. Well, long story short, what I found out, it was a group of 4 people, and it was a new team. They'd probably been there 2 or 3 months before me, but we were all having trouble understanding what this person meant, and no one would fess up to it. And I would ask questions to try to clarify, and they seemed to get annoyed. So any advice on something like that?
You've run into the buzz. I think you've run into the buzzsaw of social norms and human behavior. I think that the way you approached it, like Alice asking Humpty and saying, hey, that's not what glory means, or questioning and challenging things and saying, I don't understand social norms. Why do we all face the same way on elevators? They're very, very difficult to break. Why is it difficult? I'm proud of you for speaking up and asking these questions. And I'm disappointed in these people for seeming annoyed and not helping you, because I think that you were doing the proper thing and overcoming the social stigma of asking questions in a large group, which often, as somebody that tries to help other people get better at their own communication, my number one piece of advice is ask. And it seems so simple, but it's often the most difficult to do because of all the things I've talked about. But sometimes asking can be the most effective way, unless you run into somebody like the people that you ran into, where they seem just annoyed. Mm-hmm. What do you do in cases like that? That's more of a psychology question. I don't know. I think you were doing it the right way. Perhaps going to them and expressing the risks of you not understanding. Like the risk in my situation when I was telling them to do regression testing and they were just running the smoke test, just a few tests. and bugs were being exposed to the customer. That is a risk that was directly attributable to miscommunication. Maybe if you could express to this person, here's some bad things that could happen if I don't properly understand you. And that's why it's so important that I understand you.
Okay.
Just a guess. I'm very, very open and accessible. If anybody wants to visit my website or contact me directly, I'm happy to chat offline. I'd love to talk shop. So
Yeah, awesome. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, we will wrap this up. And again, I will, of course, send out the recording as that becomes available on my end, along with the survey, as your feedback, again, is really important to us.
I think I'll be back next month. Is that right too?
Yep, in December.
That's right. Great. Thank you again, Emily. Thanks, TSG. Thanks.
Yeah, thank everybody, or thank you, Damian, and thanks
Thank you,
everybody for joining.
Thank you for spending your time with me this afternoon. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, take care.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.